little one. Join us!
Welcome to our channel, where we delve deep into the hidden truths of Japan's ancient and terrifying folklore. In this video, we are going to explore a legend that blurs the line between the monstrous and the divine, a creature whose very existence is a herald of doom. If you find these explorations into the unknown intriguing, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, so you never miss a descent into the world of the supernatural. The sound of falling rain was the only thing that echoed through the drafty, shadow-filled interior of an old farmhouse, barn on a night that would forever be etched into the local memory. Outside, the downpour turned the earth into a thick, cloying mud, and the rhythmic drumming of water against the thatched roof created a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that seemed to isolate the small structure from the rest of the world. It was late into the midnight hours, a time when the boundary between our reality and the unseen world is said to grow thin and permeable. Inside, a farmer stood hunched over in the dim, flickering light of a single lantern, his breath visible in the cold, damp air, as he assisted one of his cows through a difficult labor. The scent of wet straw, old wood, and the iron-rich aroma of blood hung heavy in the barn, making the air feel thick and difficult to breathe. As the calf was finally delivered, the farmer reached out with trembling hands to clear the birth membranes, expecting to find the familiar, blunt snout of a newborn animal. Instead, he found himself staring into a face that defied every law of nature and sanity. The body of the creature was unmistakably that of a calf, covered in slick, wet fur and shivering from the sudden chill of the world outside the womb. But where the head of a beast should have been, there sat the head of a human man, his features twisted into an expression of profound, agonizing suffering. The skin of the face was pale and wrinkled, as if it had aged decades within the span of a single pregnancy, and its eyes were not the vacant, wide-set eyes of a herbivore, but the piercing, intelligent eyes of a person who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. There was no sound of a typical newborn's bleat or cry. Instead, this monstrous hybrid remained eerily silent, its chest heaving with shallow, wet breaths as it lay in the blood-stained straw. The creature, dripping with amniotic fluid that glistened like oil, under the lantern's weak glow, turned its head with a slow, deliberate grace and fixed its gaze directly onto the farmer. In those eyes, the man saw not a mindless animal, but a bottomless well of intellect, and a terrifying foresight that seemed to encompass every tragedy yet to come. This was the birth of a Kudan, a prophetic beast that has been both feared and worshipped across Japan for centuries. Legend tells us that a Kudan is born only during times of great upheaval or impending catastrophe. It lives for only a few days, sometimes only a few hours, but within that brief span of existence, it possesses the ability to speak the human tongue with chilling clarity. Its purpose is singular and absolute: to deliver a prophecy regarding a major disaster, a war or a famine that will soon befall the land. Once the prophecy is uttered, the Kudan's energy spent, it draws its final breath and perishes, leaving behind a world irrevocably changed by its words. The prophecies of the Kudan are said to be infallible, carrying a weight of truth that no human witness can deny. This sense of dread, of a future already written in the stars and spoken by a monster, has allowed the legend of the Kudan to take deep root in the collective psyche of the Japanese people, lingering even into the modern age. If you were to stand in that barn feeling the damp cold, seep into your bones and hearing a beast speak your future in the voice of an old man, would you have the strength to believe it? Or would you pray for it to be a hallucination born of exhaustion? As we move from the isolated barns of the countryside to the bustling streets of the late Edo and early Meiji periods, we see how the Kudan transitioned from a local omen into a national phenomenon. During this era of rapid social change and political instability, information was a precious commodity, and the appearance of a Kudan was considered the most vital news imaginable. It was not viewed as a mere ghost story, or a piece of entertainment to pass the time for the people of the 19th century. A Kudan's birth was a matter of state importance that could signal the end of a dynasty or the beginning of a national tragedy. When rumors of a Kudan birth reached a city, the local publishers would scramble to produce what were known as kawaraban, or woodblock printed broadsheets. These early newspapers featured crude, but haunting illustrations of the creature a man's face grafted onto a bull's neck and detailed accounts of its final words. These prints were sold on street corners by criers, who shouted the grim details to crowds of anxious citizens, who clutched the thin paper as if it were a talisman against the very darkness it described. The records of the Tenpo era, particularly during the Great Tenpo Famine, provide a harrowing look at how the Kudan functioned as a psychological anchor for a desperate population. In one documented instance, a village ravaged by crop failure and disease reported the birth of a human-faced calf. As the villagers gathered around the dying creature, it spoke in a voice that was described as both hollow and commanding. It told them that the rains would not return for 3 more seasons, and that the earth would remain as hard as iron, yielding no grain for the hungry. The air in the village, already heavy with the scent of wood smoke and decay, seemed to grow even colder as the prophecy was delivered. However, the Kudan offered a strange ritualistic hope. It claimed that those who drew its image and pasted it upon their front doors would be spared from the worst of the coming pestilence. This specific detail highlights a fascinating transition in the folklore. The monster became the medicine. People, driven by a primal fear for their lives, and the lives of their children, spent their last coins to buy these prints. The act of pinning the image of the monster to their homes was a way of acknowledging the grim reality of their fate, while simultaneously pleading for a reprieve. This behavior draws a striking parallel to the Amabi, the supernatural, mermaid-like creature that saw a massive resurgence during the recent global pandemic. Both creatures are heralds of disease, who provide a visual remedy to the very suffering they predict. However, while the Amabi is often depicted with a certain charm or colorful mystery, the Kudan is characterized by a heavy, suffocating atmosphere of inevitable doom. Its predictions are not suggestions, they are cold, hard facts of a universe that does not care for human suffering. For the people of the Edo period, buying a kawaraban of a Kudan was perhaps less about finding hope and more about finding a way to prepare their souls for the inevitable. It was a confrontation with the divine or the demonic, a moment where the veil was pulled back, to show the gears of a world that was winding down toward catastrophe. The shadow of this creature, appearing at every major turning point in Japanese history, served as a constant reminder that human agency is often dwarfed by the movements of a much larger and more terrifying destiny. The reach of the Kudan did not end with the modernization of Japan, rather. It found new and more terrifying ways to manifest during the tumultuous years of the Showa era, particularly during the darkest days of the Second World War. As the tide of the war turned, and the skies over Japan's major cities began to fill with the roar of enemy bombers, the legend of the Kudan returned with a renewed and sinister energy. In the city of Kobe and its surrounding mountainous districts, a series of sightings began to circulate through the whispers of the population, spreading like a wildfire fueled by fear and desperation. People spoke of a human-faced calf born in a secluded dairy farm, its eyes filled with a mournful light as it gazed upon the burning horizon. This particular Kudan was said to have issued a prophecy that was unthinkable at the time. It stated quite clearly that Japan would lose the war, and that shortly after the surrender, a rain of fire would fall from the heavens that would dwarf everything the people had suffered thus far. In the hyper-militarized society of wartime Japan, speaking of defeat was considered a supreme act of treason, punishable by imprisonment or worse by the Kempeitai, the dreaded military police. Yet because these warnings were framed as the supernatural prophecies of the Kudan, the rumors bypassed the usual channels of censorship and took hold in the collective unconscious. The authorities were deeply disturbed by the speed and intensity with which these stories spread. They launched frantic investigations to find the source of the defeatist rumors, scouring the countryside for the farm where the creature was supposedly born. They interrogated farmers, searched stables, and monitored the conversations in marketplaces, but they could never find the patient zero of the legend. It was as if the story itself was being breathed out by the very land, a manifestation of the suppressed terror of a people who knew the end was near, but were forbidden from saying so. The locations where these sightings occurred were almost always places where the sense of claustrophobia and hopelessness was at its peak. In the cramped air raid shelters and the soot-covered streets of Kobe, the voice of the Kudan was a dark mirror of the public's inner voice. Was the prophecy a cruel mockery of their plight, or was it a form of mercy? By telling them that the war would end in defeat, the Kudan was offering a terminal point to their suffering, a light at the end of a long, bloody tunnel, even if that light was the flash of an atomic blast. Historical records from that time often mention a peculiar change in the demeanor of those who heard or believed the prophecy. They did not fall into a state of panic instead. They adopted a strange, quiet resolve, a dignified resignation to a fate that was now certain. In the face of a future that has already been declared by a messenger from the beyond, the struggle of the present moment takes on a different, perhaps more bearable quality. The Kudan, in its monstrous wisdom, provided the one thing the government could not, an ending to the story. Before we continue our journey into the linguistic and scientific mysteries of this creature, I want to take a moment to engage with you directly. Imagine for a moment that you are walking through a quiet, dimly lit rural path tonight, and you encounter a creature that speaks with a human voice, claiming to be a messenger of the future. If this being offered to tell you just one thing about what lies ahead, would you want to know? Would you ask about the global shifts in our world, such as a major natural disaster or the fate of our civilization? Or would you ask something deeply personal, like the date of your own passing or the future happiness of your children? The choice to know the future is a heavy one, carrying the potential to either set you free or imprison you in a countdown. Please share your thoughts and what you would ask in the comments below. I am truly curious to see how you would handle such a confrontation with the inevitable. Beyond the realm of ghost stories and wartime rumors, the Kudan has left an indelible mark on the Japanese language itself, a testament to how deeply this folklore is woven into the fabric of daily life. Have you ever encountered the phrase Kudan no gotoshi? While it may sound like a dusty, archaic expression to some, it remains a pillar of traditional Japanese legal and formal communication. In the context of old contracts, deeds, and official proclamations, this phrase, which translates to as the Kudan, was used at the end of a document to signify that the contents were as absolute and unchanging as the prophecy of a Kudan. It was a linguistic seal of authenticity, a way of stating that the promises made in the text were devoid of any lies or hidden agendas. To use the name of a monster to guarantee the truth of a legal document is a phenomenon that is incredibly rare on the global stage, highlighting just how much authority was granted to the words of this supernatural being. The choice of the cow as the host for this human face is also a detail of profound significance in Japanese cultural history. For centuries, the cow was the most essential companion to the Japanese farmer, a dedicated and hard-working beast of burden that tilled the soil and helped sustain the village. It was a creature associated with humility, sacrifice, and a silent, stoic endurance. To have an eldritch, human-faced horror emerge from such a familiar and benevolent source created a powerful psychological dissonance. It tapped into a primal fear that the most stable parts of our lives could, at any moment, give birth to the irrational and the terrifying. Yet the Japanese people saw a kind of purity in this. They believed that while humans are inherently flawed and prone to deception for the sake of profit or ego, the animal kingdom and the monsters that spring from it cannot lie. A beast that speaks does so because the truth is so heavy it can no longer be contained within the silent world of nature. The use of Kudan no gotoshi in official documents served as a constant reminder that the truth is a sacred and often frightening thing. When a merchant or a lord signed a paper with that phrase, they were essentially invoking the power of the prophetic beast to witness their oath. They were saying that if they were to break their word, they would be defying the very laws of fate that the Kudan represents. Even today, as we move through a world of digital contracts and encrypted signatures, the ghost of the Kudan lingers in the formal registers of the language. It suggests that deep in the Japanese psyche, there remains a belief that the ultimate truth doesn't come from the logic of men, but from a source that is older, stranger, and far more uncompromising. The sharp, knowing gaze of the Kudan, as depicted in old woodblock prints, seems to follow the pen of every person who attempts to commit their will to paper, watching to ensure that the words remain true to the reality they create. If we attempt to analyze the Kudan through the lens of modern science, we find ourselves at the intersection of biology, neurology, and the psychology of the masses. From a purely biological standpoint, cases of animals being born with severe craniofacial deformities are well documented. Genetic mutations or environmental toxins can cause a calf's facial structure to collapse, or rearrange in ways that, to a stressed human observer, might resemble a human countenance. This is often explained by the psychological phenomenon of pareidolia, where the human brain, which is hardwired to recognize faces as a survival mechanism, sees a man in the moon or a face on Mars in random patterns. In the low light of a barn, amid the trauma of a difficult animal birth, it is easy to see how a farmer's mind might project a human face onto a deformed calf, creating a monster out of a biological tragedy. However, what science struggles to explain is the consistent report of articulate, complex, and grammatically correct speech coming from these creatures. A calf, even one with a human-like face, does not possess the vocal cord structure, the respiratory control, or the neural pathways required for human language. Yet the historical records are remarkably consistent in describing not just a noise, but a low, resonant male voice that conveys specific, data-heavy information. These are not the babbles of a confused mind, they are organized prophecies involving dates, directions, and casualties. How does a hallucination become so standardized across different provinces and centuries? Some researchers suggest that the speech might be a form of auditory pareidolia, where the brain interprets the wet, guttural sounds of a dying animal's breath as words, shaped by the listener's own deep-seated anxieties and expectations. But there is a more disturbing possibility that modern science has yet to fully map. Is it possible that the Kudan represents a kind of glitch in the system of reality? In the same way that a computer program might produce a strange, unintended output when the code is under too much stress, perhaps the fabric of our world produces these anomalies during times of extreme collective trauma. The Kudan could be seen as a temporary leak of information from a future that has already been calculated by the underlying laws of the universe. The biological mutation is simply the physical vessel required for this information to manifest in our three-dimensional space. The fact that the creature dies almost immediately after speaking suggests that the physical world cannot sustain such a high-density burst of illegal information for long. It is as if the universe recognizes the error and deletes the file as soon as the message is delivered. The human face on the bovine body becomes a literal interface, a way for the cold, alien logic of destiny to communicate with the emotional, panicked world of humans. In the contemporary era, the legend of the Kudan hasn't vanished. It has simply evolved into a digital urban legend, haunting the corners of the internet. One of the most persistent modern variations is the story of the Ushi-onna, or the cow woman. According to reports that circulated widely on Japanese internet forums like 2channel and through early social media, sightings of a woman with a cow's head, or a cow with a woman's face, spiked just before the 1995 Great Hanshin earthquake. These modern encounters didn't take place in barns, but in the sterile, concrete environment of underground shopping malls or in the quiet, affluent residential areas of the Kobe Hills at night. The cow woman is said to appear suddenly in the shadows, her presence heralded by a heavy metallic smell and the sound of dragging hooves. Unlike the Kudan of the past, who was often viewed with a degree of religious awe, the modern cow woman is a figure of pure, visceral terror. She represents a breakdown of the urban order, a nightmare that invades the safety of our technological world. If you encounter her, it is said that you will either experience a personal tragedy or become a witness to a disaster that will kill thousands. The transition from the prophetic beast to the cursed woman reflects a change in how we perceive our relationship with fate. In the past, prophecy was a communal event, something the whole village would prepare for. Today, the encounter is isolated and personal, reflecting the loneliness and fragmentation of modern life. The fear is no longer about the survival of the tribe, but about the random, senseless violence of a world where disasters strike without warning and without meaning. The persistence of these stories suggests that even as we surround ourselves with the light of our screens and the certainty of our algorithms, we still feel the presence of the unknown crouching in the darkness. We have replaced the criers of the Edo period with the trending hashtags of today, but the underlying psychological need remains the same. We want to believe that there is a pattern to the chaos, even if that pattern is a terrifying one. The cow woman is the modern ghost of the Kudan, a reminder that the earth beneath our feet is ancient and remembers the blood that was spilled long before the concrete was poured. She is a symbol of our unresolved anxieties about the future, a manifestation of the unpredictable in a world that prides itself on prediction. Physical evidence of the Kudan, or at least what is claimed to be evidence, can still be found in various museums and private temples throughout Japan. These Kudan mummies are grotesque objects, usually consisting of a small taxidermied calf body with a dried, shriveled human head attached. To look upon one of these artifacts is a chilling experience. The leathery skin and the sunken sockets of the eyes carry a weight of history that is hard to dismiss as a simple prank. In many cases, these mummies were used as central attractions in traveling freak shows or misamono during the Meiji era, where people would pay a few coins to see the miracle beast that had predicted the fall of the shogunate. Scientific analysis of these mummies often reveals the handiwork of incredibly skilled craftsmen. Using a combination of animal bones, plaster, and human hair, these artisans created fakes that were so convincing they could withstand close inspection by a superstitious public. However, to call them fake is to miss the point of their existence. These objects were created because people wanted to believe in the Kudan. They were physical anchors for a mythology that gave meaning to their lives. Even if the mummy in the glass case is a construction of wood and hide, the fear it inspired and the prayers offered to it were entirely real. The artifact is a vessel for the collective belief of a nation. The aura of these mummies continues to fascinate and repel visitors to this day. There is something about the thingness of the Kudan mummy that defies the logic of the laboratory. When you stand in the quiet hall of a temple looking at a creature that should not exist, you aren't thinking about the craftsmanship of a Meiji-era artist. You are thinking about the possibility that somewhere, in the dark corners of the world, nature really did produce such a horror. The mummy serves as a bridge between the world of stories and the world of physical reality. It is a reminder that our ancestors didn't just tell tales. They lived in a world where the boundary between the real and the impossible was constantly being crossed. As we reach the end of this exploration into the shadows of Japanese history, there is one final, chilling detail that often gets overlooked in the standard accounts of the Kudan. Some ancient texts suggest that the Kudan doesn't just predict the deaths of others in its final moments. It is said to predict its own disappearance from the human heart. There is a prophecy attributed to a Kudan born in a remote mountain village centuries ago, which claimed that its true power would only be revealed when it was finally forgotten. When I am no longer feared, and when my name is but a footnote in a book of fables, that is when the greatest of all calamities shall arrive, the creature supposedly whispered before it died. This suggests that the legend of the Kudan acts as a sort of spiritual early warning system for the culture. By keeping the memory of the monster alive, we stay attuned to the fragility of our existence and the reality of change. When we become too comfortable, too reliant on our own technological mastery, we lose the ability to read the signs of the coming storm. The Kudan, in its repulsive and frightening form, forces us to look at the things we would rather ignore. It is a mirror held up to the darker parts of our nature and the uncertain parts of our future. Perhaps the real danger isn't the monster itself, but the silence that follows when we stop listening for its voice. Next time you are alone at night and you hear a sound that doesn't quite fit the environment, the rustle of straw where there is no barn, or a voice that sounds too old for the body that carries it, do not be so quick to dismiss it. It might just be the world trying to tell you something that you aren't ready to hear. If you've stayed with me this far, I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into one of Japan's most unsettling legends. If you have any of your own stories about premonitions or strange encounters, please leave them in the comments. We love reading your experiences. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can join us for our next journey into the unknown. Until then, keep your eyes open and your heart guarded. We will see you in the next haunting.